Wednesday, March 25, 2026, AGNDD IntelliReport topic. Iran War Live Updates. Tehran dismisses U.S. ceasefire conditions as Israel steps up attacks. Please pardon any visual and informational inaccuracies in this partially AI-generated article-based video. The New York Times, updated 3h ago, March 25, 2026, 11:19 p.m. ET. Iran War Live Updates. Tehran dismisses U.S. ceasefire conditions as Israel steps up attacks. Tehran offered its own terms to end the fighting that include a demand for reparations. Israel, concerned that the war might end before it can dismantle Iran's weapons programs, plans to ramp up its attacks. Current time in Beirut, Tel Aviv, 1:58 a.m. March 26th. Tehran, 3:28 a.m. March 26th. Pinned, updated, March 25th, 2026, 8:08 p.m. ET, 10 m ago. Eric Schmidt, Elian Peltier, Adam Razgan, Abdi Latif Tahir, and David E. Sanger. Here's the latest. The United States and Iran struggled to find a way to begin negotiations over peace terms on Wednesday, with each insisting it had the upper hand in the war. The United States circulated a 15-point peace plan, diplomats said, demanding what would amount to a complete termination of Iran's nuclear program and strict limits on its missile arsenal. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said Iran's forces had been crushed after 4 weeks of strikes by the United States and Israel. That's why you are beginning to see the regime look for an exit ramp, she said. But Iranian officials didn't sound defeated. In a statement issued through state television, an official said the government would not end the attacks unless the United States paid war reparations and recognized Iranian control over a vital oil route, the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has effectively blocked the strait to most shipping. The Iranian official said that Tehran would not allow Mr. Trump to dictate the timing of the war's end. Later, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said in an interview with a state broadcaster that Iran had no intention of negotiating. Still, Iranian officials signaled privately on Tuesday that they were open to negotiations, raising the prospect of a cessation in hostilities. Israel, worried that Mr. Trump might end the war before it had achieved its goals, dismantling Iran's ballistic missile program and blocking its ability to develop nuclear programs, moved on Wednesday to step up its efforts to destroy as much of Iran's military capabilities as possible. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered a 48-hour campaign of attacks focused on crippling Iran's arms industry, according to 2 senior Israeli officials and 2 people briefed on the matter. Here's what else we're covering. Carrier attacked. Iran's military said on Wednesday that it had fired cruise missiles at the U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, according to the Iranian semi-official Mehr news agency, hours after an Iranian naval commander warned it would strike if the vessel came within range. Fighting in Lebanon. The Israeli military struck the southern outskirts of Beirut, a stronghold of the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah, as well as several towns in the south, Lebanon's national news agency said. Israel also said it had targeted gas stations tied to Hezbollah's financial network. United States. Several congressional Republicans left classified Pentagon briefings on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, frustrated by the lack of crucial details about next steps in the war. Nearly a month into the fighting, Republicans have given Mr. Trump broad latitude to wage war without congressional input and resisted summoning administration officials for public accountability. Tension in Iraq. Iraq's prime minister instructed the foreign ministry to summon the U.S. Embassy's charge d'affaires and deliver a strongly worded letter of protest. It came after a strike that the defense ministry said killed 7 soldiers and injured 13 others on Wednesday at a site in western Iraq belonging to the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella organization for militias that include Iran-backed brigades. It was unclear who was responsible for the attacks, but the group's attacks on U.S. forces have prompted retaliatory strikes. Death tolls. Iran's UN ambassador has said that at least 1,348 civilians have been killed in the country since the war began, a toll that has not been updated since March 11th. The human rights activists' news agency has reported that more than 1,440 civilians have been killed in Iran. Almost 1,100 people in Lebanon have been killed, the authorities there said on Wednesday. At least 15 people were killed in Iranian attacks on Israel, officials said. The American death toll stands at 13 service members. March 25, 2026, 11:17 p.m. at 3 hours ago, Qasim Nauman. There was no let-up in missile and drone launches toward Persian Gulf nations on Thursday morning. The authorities in the United Arab Emirates said their air defenses were responding to incoming missiles and drones from Iran. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry and the Kuwait National Guard said they had intercepted drones without saying where they came from. Bahrain's interior ministry said there was a fire because of Iranian aggression, but did not give details about the strike or the facility that was hit. March 25, 2026, 10:58 p.m. ET. 3 hours ago. Francesca Regalado. The Israeli military said it completed a new wave of strikes targeting infrastructure in the Iranian city of Isfahan and other areas of the country. March 25, 2026, 9:43 p.m. ET. 2 hours ago. Efrat Livni, international breaking news reporter. Alexei Likachev, head of Rosatom, the Russian Atomic Energy Corporation, said Russia planned to carry out several rounds of personnel evacuations from Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, the Russian state news agency TASS reported on Wednesday. The personnel evacuations signal Russia's concern. On Tuesday, a projectile hit the grounds of the Iranian plant, which Russia helps to operate, and a similar incident occurred there last week. Dmitry S. Peskov, a Kremlin spokesman, said that Moscow was in continual contact with the International Atomic Energy Agency about the situation, TASS noted. Efrat Livni, March 25, 2026, 8:14 p.m. ET, 13 m. ago. Bahrain's Interior Ministry early on Thursday blamed Iranian aggression for a fire at a facility in Muharraq Governorate, which it said had been extinguished. There were no injuries. Efrat Livni, March 25, 2026, 8:12 p.m. ET, 11 m. ago. After sirens sounded in central Israel, the country's emergency rescue service early on Thursday morning said teams were scanning scenes and treating people who were injured on the way to shelters or suffered from anxiety. Israel's public broadcaster reported that the launches at central Israel had been fired by Hezbollah in Lebanon. March 25, 2026, 7:47 p.m. ET, 14 minutes ago. Robert Jimison, Megan Monero, and Eric Schmidt. Reporting from Washington, Republicans in Congress fret over Iran war as Pentagon offers few answers. We will not sacrifice American lives for the same failed foreign policies, Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina said on Wednesday. Republicans in Congress are growing more anxious about the Trump administration's handling of the war in Iran as their questions about its objectives and cost, including whether ground troops will be needed, go unanswered. Several GOP lawmakers emerged on Wednesday from classified briefings with Pentagon officials on Capitol Hill, complaining that they had not received crucial details about the way forward. Their frustration came nearly a month into a conflict in which Republicans have given President Trump broad latitude to wage war with no congressional input and resisted calling administration officials to provide a public accounting of what they are doing. Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee, who attended one of the briefings on Wednesday, said senior officials had failed to provide basic details about the scope and direction of the military campaign. "We want to know more about what's going on," an uncharacteristically irritated Mr. Rogers told reporters. "We're just not getting enough answers." Across the Capitol, Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, the Republican chairman of his chamber's Armed Services panel, suggested he was also frustrated about the lack of information. "Let me put it this way," Mr. Wicker said of his House counterpart, according to Politico. "I can see why he might have said that." The complaints came as the Pentagon prepared to deploy nearly 7,000 additional troops to the Middle East, including forces from the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit based at Camp Pendleton, California, and the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, moves intended to bolster operations tied to the war in Iran. They surfaced as lawmakers are also bracing for a potential $200 billion funding request from the Trump administration to pay for the conflict. Other Republicans echoed those concerns, pointing to discrepancies between the administration's public rationale and objectives for the war and the information that had been shared privately with them. Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina said she left the briefing troubled by what she described as shifting explanations for the conflict and unclear military objectives. The justifications presented to the American public for the war in Iran were not the same military objectives we were briefed on today in the House Armed Services Committee, Ms. Mace said in a social media post. This gap is deeply troubling. The longer this war continues, the faster it will lose the support of Congress and the American people. In classified briefings for lawmakers in both chambers on Wednesday, Pentagon officials declined to outline when or how U.S. ground forces might be used in Iran, according to two people familiar with the sessions who spoke about them on the condition of anonymity. During the closed-door session with senators, according to another person familiar with it who requested anonymity to describe it in general terms, the Republican senators Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Jerry Moran of Kansas, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska complained about how limited the information was, including requests for details on the cost of the military campaign. Senator John Hoeven, Republican of North Dakota, said that officials don't have an official number at this point for the cost of the operation. Asked about the Pentagon's $200 billion funding request for the war, he told reporters that the administration was obviously working to figure out how we're going to get it done. To date, few Republicans have publicly joined Democrats in raising questions about the war, even as Democrats have tried repeatedly to demand testimony from top officials and force votes insisting that Congress authorize the use of force. But with the conflict dragging on, gas prices rising, and more U.S. troops heading to the region, some in the GOP have begun sounding alarms. We will not sacrifice American lives for the same failed foreign policies, Ms. Mace said on Wednesday. The war machine may be willing to give the lives of your sons and daughters for the price of oil, but we are not. At the White House, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, defended the administration's approach, reiterating that it does not believe formal congressional authorization is required at this stage of the conflict. She said notifications to Congress and classified briefings had been provided out of courtesy and out of respect, describing the current situation in the Middle East not as a war, but as major combat operations against Iran. Katie Edmondson contributed reporting. March 25, 2026, 7:44 p.m. ET, 19 minutes ago. Efrat Livni, international breaking news reporter. Sheikh Fahad Yusuf al-Sabah, Kuwait's deputy prime minister and interior minister, said on Wednesday that the state's security officials had thwarted a terrorist network and plot targeting vital facilities in the country and arrested 10 individuals affiliated with Hezbollah, according to Kuwait's state news agency. He accused them of coordinating with entities abroad and providing them with coordinates of sites to target. Kuwait's Interior Ministry spokesman said the 10 individuals had confessed to espionage, noting the network involved individuals from Kuwait, Iran, and Lebanon. March 25, 2026, 7:32 p.m. ET, 31 minutes ago. Eric Schmidt, reporting from Washington. ADM. Brad Cooper, the head of the U.S. Central Command, said on Wednesday that the United States has struck more than 10,000 military targets in Iran since the start of the war on Feb. 28. In a 3-minute video operational update, Admiral Cooper said that American warplanes had damaged or destroyed more than two-thirds of Iran's missile, drone, and naval production facilities and shipyards. But once again, he offered no details on how much longer the war would last, and he did not mention any new efforts to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the strategic waterway that Iran has effectively closed to most commercial shipping. March 25, 2026, 7 p.m. ET. 1 hour ago. Robert Jimison, congressional reporter. Trump draws bipartisan backlash for easing oil sanctions on Russia and Iran. The Trump administration's decision to ease oil sanctions on Russia and Iran in a bid to contain soaring energy prices prompted by the war with Iran has drawn bipartisan backlash on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers warned that it risks funneling billions of dollars to U.S. adversaries. Lawmakers in both parties said the policy undercut years of economic pressure designed to weaken Moscow's war effort in Ukraine and constrain Tehran's regional ambitions. Easing sanctions on Russia at this critical juncture, instead of increasing pressure, risks fueling Russia's aggression and undermining progress we have made to reduce Russia's global energy leverage. Representatives Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, and Gregory W. Meeks of New York, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said in a letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Secretary of State Marco Rubio demanding answers on the administration's decision to ease sanctions on Russian oil. Earlier this month, President Trump lifted restrictions on Russian oil exports, allowing shipments to resume to buyers around the world as officials scrambled to stabilize global supply following disruptions tied to the war in Iran. Days later, the administration temporarily waived sanctions on roughly 140 million barrels of Iranian oil sitting at sea, opening those cargoes to the global market for 30 days. With crude hovering near $100 a barrel, the twin moves were intended to ease pressure on gasoline prices at home. But they could also deliver a financial windfall to two countries at the center of U.S. national security concerns. Criticism has come from across the political spectrum. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, called lifting restrictions on Russian oil the wrong move, adding that every dollar generated from sales fuels Putin's war and prolongs suffering in Ukraine. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee, signaled unease with the administration's broader strategy, criticizing the combined decision to ease sanctions on both Russian and Iranian oil. The moves, he said on Tuesday, were not my favorite thing that I've ever heard. In a floor speech on Tuesday, Senator Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, warned that the temporary waivers would enrich the very countries that we wish to harm, contending that they reversed the impact of earlier sanctions that had begun to squeeze Russia's finances. The effect of President Trump's sanctions policy is now at risk of being reversed, Mr. Moran said, noting estimates that both Russia and Iran could reap billions of dollars in additional revenue during the waiver period. It makes no sense to provide financial relief to a country that we are currently fighting. Democrats have gone further, casting the moves as evidence of a reactive and poorly coordinated strategy as the administration grapples with the economic fallout of a widening conflict in the Middle East. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, said the decision to lift sanctions on Iranian oil could hand Tehran as much as $14 billion at a moment when the United States is actively engaged in military operations against its leadership. President Trump's reckless decisions are literally fueling the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps' ability to launch attacks, crack down on Iranians, and export terrorism, Mr. Reed said in a statement, referring to Iran's powerful and ideologically driven military force and network of proxy groups in the region. He added that the administration appeared to be reversing its own maximum pressure campaign on Iran just weeks after imposing new restrictions, calling the shift short-sighted and unlikely to produce meaningful relief for consumers. We're literally putting money into the pockets of the very nations that we are fighting right now, Senator Christopher S. Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, said on NBC's Meet the Press. The administration has defended the moves as necessary to prevent further spikes in energy prices that could ripple through the global economy and hit American consumers. Officials maintain that the waivers are temporary and narrowly tailored, designed to increase supply at a moment when disruptions have tightened markets. But they have at times struggled to offer a coherent justification. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who has led the process of exempting Iranian and Russian oil, did not deny that the moves would provide a windfall to the two nations, but said the size of those profits had been grossly overstated. Speaking on Meet the Press, he asserted that moving the oil from an illicit market to an open market would allow the Treasury Department a better line of sight over the transactions so that it could engage in what he described as financial martial arts. In essence, we are jujitsuing the Iranians, he said. We are using their own oil against them. Some Republicans in Congress, too, have been at pains to defend the policy. I understand why the president did it, Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, said of the moves. He added that I wish he hadn't had to do it. Mr. Kennedy and other Republicans indicated that details of the strategy had not been shared with lawmakers, but deferred to the White House on it. The president's got data that we don't have, and so I don't think it's fair to second-guess him on that, Mr. Kennedy said, adding that he did not think that Mr. Trump particularly enjoyed removing those sanctions. For years, restrictions on Russian and Iranian oil have been a central tool of U.S. strategy, aimed at limiting the revenue that both governments can devote to military operations. Lawmakers in both parties have backed additional measures to tighten those restrictions, with more than 80 senators supporting legislation to further penalize Russian energy exports. The new waivers, critics say, cut against that effort at a pivotal moment. Mr. Moran warned that growing cooperation between Moscow and Tehran highlighted how easing pressure on either country benefited both. The influx of cash is a gift to one of our nation's greatest adversaries intent on continuing its war in Ukraine, dividing NATO and cooperating with China, Iran, and North Korea to undermine American interests, he said, adding that the waivers signal desperation to the Iranian regime and reinforces that their strategy of taking the Strait of Hormuz hostage is working. March 25, 2026, 6:28 p.m. 2 hours ago. Efrat Livni, international breaking news reporter. Here's what happened in the war in the Middle East on Wednesday. Iran publicly dismissed President Trump's proposal for a ceasefire on Wednesday, though privately Iranian officials have signaled openness to negotiations, and the United States is said to be circulating a 15-point peace plan. Amid the possibility of talks to end the war, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered a 48-hour campaign of attacks focused on crippling Iran's arms industry. A senior Iranian official rejected Mr. Trump's proposal to end the war, instead laying out Iran's conditions, including reparations and recognition of the country's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, according to Press TV, Iran's state-run English broadcaster. The United States sent a 15-point plan of its own to Iran, demanding what would amount to a complete termination of Iran's nuclear program and sharp limits on the reach and size of their missile arsenal. But the Pentagon has also ordered the deployment of about 2,000 more soldiers to the Middle East, bringing recent regional deployments to nearly 7,000 and suggesting it is readying for continued fighting. Here's what else happened. Iran, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, a former Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps commander and the Speaker of Iran's parliament, has emerged as a potential contact point for negotiations to end the war. An Iranian military spokesman said on Wednesday that the situation in the Strait of Hormuz will not return to what it was and that Iran will control passage through the strategic waterway. The mayor of Tehran said that 2,000 families had been left homeless by strikes on the Iranian capital. Lebanon. Israeli troops continued to attack Hezbollah across Lebanon and targeted gas stations they said were tied to the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group's financial network. Nearly 1,100 people have been killed in Lebanon since Hezbollah fired rockets into Israel after the start of the war in Iran. Hezbollah's leader, Naim Qassem, signaled that the group was preparing for a long fight amid chatter about a possible halt to fighting in Iran. Persian Gulf. Iraq's prime minister on Wednesday instructed the country's foreign ministry to summon the U.S. Embassy's charge d'affaires in Baghdad amid rising tensions over a deadly strike on an Iraqi military base. The defense ministry said 7 soldiers died and 13 were injured at a site in western Iraq belonging to the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella organization for militias that include Iran-backed brigades. It was unclear who was responsible, but the group's attacks on U.S. forces have prompted retaliatory strikes. Israel. Mr. Netanyahu addressed government officials and local officials in the north near the border with Lebanon and urged them to try to prevent community members from leaving the region as they did in the last war with Hezbollah, saying Israel was expanding a security buffer that it had created in southern Lebanon. United States 13 American service members have died and 290 have been injured, with all but 35 back on duty since the war began, the U.S. Central Command said. Iran's retaliatory bombing of U.S. bases across the Middle East has forced many American troops to relocate to regional hotels and office spaces. Republicans on the House Foreign Affairs Committee blocked an effort by Democrats to force senior Trump administration officials to testify about the war's objectives and costs. The administration said it would temporarily suspend some anti-smog restrictions to try to ease the wartime spike in fuel prices. Markets. Stocks rose across the globe and oil prices eased, as investors digested conflicting reports about the state of peace talks between the Americans and the Iranians as a sign that the United States is at least seeking an end to the conflict.
Thank you for watching this AGNDD Until I Report, dear viewers. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell button to get notified during new uploads. And make sure to tune in next time. Stay safe and healthy. Cheers!